Now, I've done top 10 lists on almost everything, but over the next few weeks, I'm going to be doing some more. This time, I'm going to be spanning 4 decades worth of films. So, I'm going to be doing my top 10 best and worst films of the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and the first decade of the 2000s. Let's get this party started with the top 10 best films of the 70s. Number 10. Jesus Christ Superstar. There's a common misconception when it comes to this film and the play it's based on. Many people think it's a religious movie, but it really isn't. Even the actors from the movie and play, such as Ted Neely, Carl Anderson, and Yvonne Elliman, have all said that while the story is about Jesus Christ, it's not necessarily a religious film. It's first and foremost a rock opera, and a damn good one at that. They take a lot of liberties with the story and change things that they needed to in order to make it a musical, and I find a lot of the changes that they made to be really good and unique. For one, the story is told from Judas's point of view, which gives the film a far more different tone and look than any of the other films that have tried to tell the story. Legendary musical composer Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote this play with Tim Rice, and to me, this is the best musical that pair wrote, and that says a lot because they wrote the classic Evita as well. A lot of people tend to look down on Jesus Christ Superstar because they don't like the thought of the Bible being turned into a musical, but you really shouldn't watch the film with that thought. You should just watch it like any other normal musical because it's a good musical. The performances are wonderful, especially from Ted Neely and Carl Anderson, and the cinematography is unbelievably beautiful. True, the film does look incredibly dated with its 70s look, but that doesn't change my opinion of it, and it shouldn't change the opinion from other fans as well. Number 9. The Bad News Bears. Everyone from my generation talks about the Mighty Ducks or the Big Green, and while I do like those movies, for me, it's always about the Bad News Bears. The Bad News Bears is the original Misfit Kids sports movie, and in my opinion, it's still the best of the bunch. Despite the movie's age, the story still seems to hold up very well today, about a washed-up baseball player who is now working a cruddy job and is duped into coaching a children's baseball team. The kids are written fairly well, and Walter Matthau easily steals the show as the character of Buttermaker. The movie's jokes also hold up after all this time. The kids had great comedic timing with Matthau, and the other adult characters are just so over the top and serious that it makes them equally as funny to watch as everything else. I've already said a lot about this movie in my versus match between the Bad News Bears versus the Mighty Ducks, but to make a long story short, it's a classic comedy that never gets old. Number 8. Young Frankenstein. This was actually one of those films that I was very reluctant on seeing for the longest time because I love the original Frankenstein novel and most of the darker and serious adaptations that have come out for it over the years, so I was very much turned off by a comedic parody of it. However, I was finally convinced to sit down and watch the film by a friend, and what I saw was easily one of the funniest films that I had ever seen in my life. It's one of those films that you just can't help but love because it's so insane. Mel Brooks is just really talented when it comes to writing parodies, and he and Gene Wilder did a great job with Young Frankenstein. They took the serious and dramatic tone of the novel and the other films and made it into a comedy, and it worked. I think what's really cool is that they stayed loyal to the other films before it and still managed to make it funny, and that's what makes Young Frankenstein such a unique film and makes it stand out in the world of parodies. Also, to the film's credit, the comedy has not aged at all. The jokes in Young Frankenstein are timeless. There are some older films where the jokes do speak to its particular era, and you would have to have grown up in that era to get the joke. Young Frankenstein doesn't do that. It creates jokes that everyone can find funny. Number 7. Carrie. Based on the Stephen King novel, Carrie is one of those Stephen King adaptations that actually turned out just as good, if not better, than the original novel. It captures what the novel was, scary but also rather bizarre, about a young teenage girl who's not only an outcast at school, but lives with her overly religious and abusive mother. All of the stress and anger gives her telekinesis powers, which seems to build up whenever she is angry. This eventually leads to her burning down her school and ends in tragedy with her death. Carrie's storyline might seem like your classic outrageous Stephen King storyline, and when you read the book, it does seem that way, but it's the film that brings a sense of realism to it. Sissy Spacek as Carrie is really the actress that helped bring this film to life and made you feel for the main character. Other Stephen King adaptations are kind of held back by the fact that a lot of filmmakers don't seem to know how to bring his rather unique stories and characters into the film, and sometimes try so hard to remain loyal to the source material that it comes off just just as unusual on screen. However, while that might work for a book, it doesn't necessarily work for a live-action movie. Director Brian De Palma and screenwriter Lawrence Cohen were smart with the source material, keeping what would work for the movie but leaving out smaller elements but making sure to keep the story loyal to its source material. They succeeded where most filmmakers have failed with Stephen King adaptations. Number 6. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, another book adaptation, this time based on Roald Dahl's classic children's book, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Ironically, this timeless classic was hated by Roald Dahl. He literally disowned the movie upon release and had nothing nice to say about it. He was so angry that he refused its sequel, Charlie and the Glass Elevator, to be made. It's easy to see why he would be mad, but for fans, it's a legendary movie that has stood the test of time. No, it's not 100% loyal to the source material, but in a way, that makes it a better movie. The small changes they made make it a better story for the film. Like I've said before in my Harry Potter reviews, some things that work in books are not necessarily going to translate well for film, and there are some changes that have to be made. Hardcore fans of the books might not like the changes, but in the end, screenplay writers are going to do what they feel will benefit the movie. In fact, I've always viewed the changing of the title to be a direct hint from the creators of the movie that this was not exactly like the book, almost to eliminate the expectations of the readers who will be watching the film. Loyal or not, to me, this film couldn't have turned out any better. The story is good, and the characters were expertly casted. Gene Wilder was the perfect Willy Wonka, showing a rather outgoing and goofy character, but at the same time, added a bit of mystery to him, showing that while he was goofy on the outside, there were moments where his genius did show in specific parts of the movie. The kids were also perfect, fitting into the characters well, especially Peter Ostrom as Charlie. One of Roald Dahl's main complaints against the movie was that he felt that it focused way too much on Willy Wonka than it did Charlie. Thankfully, he never got to see Tim Burton's adaptation of the book. Number 5. This is a tie between The Godfather and The Godfather 2. It's tough picking which one is better, so I'm just going to put these two movies on the same number. While mafia films weren't exactly new back then, a realistic mafia film was a little hard to come by. The Godfather 1 and 2 were two movies that had a fairly realistic look at what the mafia was. It wasn't only about the violence or the look, it was also about the family and that family's story. The first Godfather was the very first crime film that I ever watched, and to this day, it's still a movie that I constantly pop into my DVD player and watch time and time again. It showed that crime movies could be more than just about the style and the violence. It showed that there could be a good story and great acting in them as well. Granted, there are moments that do show the film's age. For instance, some of the death scenes are a bit overacted, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still one of the best film stories ever written. Add in the great performances of Marlon Brando and Al Pacino, and you've got the perfect flick. What could possibly equal that greatness? Its sequel, The Godfather 2. Godfather 2 took everything that the first film was and made it just as good, which for any sequel is one hell of an accomplishment. What else can I say? They're two kick-ass movies that revolutionized how crime films are told. Number 4. The Exorcist. There aren't many book adaptations that I recall that have the actual author as the screenwriter, and that definitely worked in The Exorcist's favor because not only is it 100% loyal to the novel, but it's easily one of the greatest horror films that I've ever seen. Now, I'm not gonna lie, The Exorcist was never scary to me. It came off creepy, but nothing ever made me jump or feel scared at any point. What won me over was the way it was made. It's incredibly well filmed, and the camera tricks and the effects that they pull off in this film are quite impressive for 1973. The acting is also top-notch. Linda Blair, despite her age at the time, managed to pull off a very impressive performance that made you believe that she was actually possessed. The possession was actually the part that I found the most creepy, mainly because some of the dialogue is very adult, and Linda Blair was 13 at the time of filming, and even though it's dubbed over, she still has to say it so the voice actor can dub over it. So just the thought of a 13-year-old saying some of the things that she does is creepy by itself. The lighting, makeup, acting, and music just keeps you emotionally invested and keeps The Exorcist from showing any signs of age. What horror film can top that? And that will lead us into number 3, Halloween. Okay. I know this wouldn't be put above The Exorcist by some people, but I truly believe Halloween to be slightly better than The Exorcist. The way The Exorcist won me over was, again, from the way it was made, from its design and acting, and all of the cool effects that they pulled off at the time. Halloween won me over for the exact opposite. It won me over for its simplicity. On a really small budget of $300,000, Halloween was a movie that was not only scary, but still remains one of the most remembered independent films of all time. Halloween is simply about a killer who escapes from a hospital and terrorizes his hometown of Haddonfield on Halloween night. Director John Carpenter took that simple story and that low budget and made it look great and appear much more expensive than it really was. I love the subtlety of Carpenter's direction and the fact that it's a movie that's not overly gory and not really that violent despite what many people might think. They also managed to write characters that were much more believable than some of the other horror films that came out during this time, and they actually take the time for you to get to know each character well. This is the way a horror film should be made. The Exorcist and Halloween represent what horror films should be. It shouldn't be about the blood and violence. It's about the suspense, atmosphere, and story. So many horror flicks have failed because filmmakers think that more blood is the answer, and Halloween and The Exorcist proved that that is not always the case. Number 2. Rocky. Not only is this one of my favorite movies from the 70s, but this is my favorite film that stars Sylvester Stallone. Stallone wrote a story that might not have been overly realistic, but the way it was told made it feel very real. The making of the film is almost just like the story, a movie with very little money that wound up going the distance and making millions at the box office and becoming one of the most beloved movies in film history. I love the way John Avildsen directed the film. A lot of critics found Avildsen's directing to be boring and uninteresting, but in my opinion, I thought it was a brilliantly shot movie. The film's look mirrors the character very well. The shots are simple, and the look of the sets and locations represent the rundown life that Rocky lives. Rocky is also home to some of film's most remembered characters, ranging from, of course, the title character Rocky Balboa, all the way to the classic character of Mickey, which is my absolute favorite role from the late, great Burgess Meredith. The Rocky story is one of the most inspirational stories I've ever seen in film. In fact, it's inspired most of my own film career, and while I'm still very early in the stages of my own career, I look to movies like Rocky and know that hard work and effort goes a long way. And number 1, Star Wars. Yeah, what other movie were you expecting? Star Wars broke so much ground in the world of filmmaking. It's not only one of the most beloved science fiction films, but it's one of the most beloved films, period. It's not just a film, it's a phenomenon that only gets better with each viewing. And when I say each viewing, I'm talking about the original, not the bajillion special editions that have come out over the years. George Lucas took the science fiction genre of film and added a bit of humanity to it. What I mean by that is that up to that point, the science fiction genre was always humans versus aliens or some form of creature. Star Wars is probably the most down-to-earth science fiction story I've ever seen. It's a very human political war story that's set in the future and in space. It's a unique movie too because it doesn't start from the very beginning of the story. In fact, it starts from part 4, which is unbelievable. However, that doesn't slow down the movie at all. The story gives us a sense that there is a history with all of the characters, and instead of feeling incomplete, it felt like a complete film. Even without the prequels, Star Wars actually stood on its own very well. Also, I still stand by what I said on my Star Wars review. This film's cast has the best chemistry that I've ever seen in film. Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, and Harrison Ford are just flawless together on screen. Also, add in the great performances of Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan, Peter Cushing as Governor Tarkin, and the dual performances of David Prowse and James Earl Jones as Darth Vader, and you've got easily the most memorable cast in film. And we can't leave out the effects. These effects might look old today, but this was unbelievably revolutionary at the time. The space battles were awesome back then, and they're still awesome now. So that's my top 10 best films of the 70s. However, we're not done yet. Let's take a look at the top 10 worst films of the 70s.